With Catherine beside him, our new Prince and Princess of Wales will, I know, continue to inspire and lead our national conversations, helping to bring the marginal to the centre ground.
Behind a locked door deep inside Buckingham Palace, King Charles lowered his pen after signing a document that had the power to reshape the British monarchy in ways that would echo long after his reign was over. This was not a casual administrative decision. It was not routine paperwork. That formally and permanently named her as the woman who would stand at the center of the crown beside William, and it ordered the removal of Camilla from the monarchy's long-term governing structure entirely. When Charles finally set down the pen, nobody in that room allowed themselves any expression of relief or satisfaction. They understood, with complete and sober clarity, that one royal future had just been secured by bringing another one to a definitive close. Before we go any further into what this decision truly means for the royal family and for the country, make sure you subscribe so you never miss a single update. Charles kept his hand resting beside the pen as silence settled over the room. His private secretary stood to one side. The constitutional advisor waited without moving. The king had just signed what was being referred to internally as the Crown Continuity Instrument, a confidential legal framework setting out precisely how authority, household control, ceremonial influence, and public leadership would transfer into the next reign. This was not an abdication. Charles had not surrendered the throne or handed immediate command to William and Catherine. But the effect of what he had signed was enormous and irreversible. It formally confirmed Catherine as the future queen standing alongside the Prince of Wales, and it removed Camilla from future succession planning, from strategic royal councils, and from any long-term representation of the crown beyond the current reign. The monarch read Camilla's name on the page one final time and pressed his thumb quietly against the paper. "Is there no other way?" he asked, though some part of him already understood the answer he would receive. The constitutional advisor explained without sentiment that further delay would leave the monarchy operating between two competing centers of influence, each pulling in different directions. William required certainty before he could build the next reign with any confidence. Catherine required the freedom to prepare for a role that would demand everything from her. And Camilla would lose the future position she had long believed her years of loyalty and endurance had permanently secured. Charles tightened his jaw. The decision protected his son and daughter-in-law. It also wounded, deeply and permanently, the woman who had stood beside him through public rejection, through years of hostility, and through the long and painful journey toward eventual acceptance. A sealed annex was attached to the main document, and its contents made the decree considerably more powerful than it appeared on the surface. An annex of this kind is an additional section connected to an official document, containing detail that is deliberately withheld from the main body of the text. This one granted Catherine formal oversight of royal strategy, charitable direction, youth engagement programs, and ceremonial reform. She would have a genuine and authoritative voice in deciding how the next reign communicated with the public, how it served the nation, and how it connected with younger generations who were already losing interest in the institution. A second clause within the annex blocked Camilla's personal advisors and household associates from retaining any influence once Charles's reign came to an end, systematically dismantling a network that had fully expected to survive the transition intact. Within minutes of the signing, a palace aide collected 2 sealed envelopes and carried them through the corridors. One moved in the direction of William and Catherine, bringing with it both an enormous weight of responsibility and the confirmation of a future they had been quietly preparing for. The other moved toward Camilla, carrying something far more painful. Documented proof that the future she had believed was guaranteed had been closed, personally and deliberately, by the man she had trusted with everything. But before either woman could begin to process what Charles had done, the existence of the document forced the palace to confront something it had been carefully avoiding for months. The personal loyalties, the old wounds, and the deeply competing visions for the monarchy's future that every member of the family had been keeping behind a composed and controlled public face. For Catherine, the sealed envelope represented a future she had spent years disciplining herself to serve but had never once allowed herself to openly claim. For Camilla, it represented something altogether more devastating. The realization that history was preparing to move past her while she was still standing inside the palace walls. Two women separated by a generation, by very different reputations, and by entirely different conceptions of what royal duty meant, were now bound to the same document. One was being elevated toward the crown. The other was being removed from its future. Catherine opened the envelope beside William at Adelaide Cottage. The first page left her completely still. Everything she had built within the institution had come through discipline, through years of restraint, through the stability she had brought to her family, and through the patient accumulation of genuine public trust. She had never once approached queenship as though it were a prize waiting to be claimed. She had always understood it as a duty, one that would demand sacrifice from her marriage, from her children, and from every quiet and private corner of her life. Which is precisely why the words naming her as the monarchy's future central female figure brought no sense of triumph. No smile. Nothing that resembled victory. The crown continuity instrument had placed extraordinary power in her hands while simultaneously closing the door on everything Camilla had been working toward. William watched her read the same sentence twice before she set the pages down on the table and moved away from him. She spoke quietly. "Someone," she said, "is about to be deeply hurt." The prince followed her, choosing every word with care. He told her that the document was not a reward for anything she had done. It was protection. Protection for the institution, for their children, and for a future reign that could not function beneath the weight of divided loyalties. She turned back to face him, visibly shaken, and told him plainly that protection could still feel like cruelty when it was constructed from another person's loss. He did not argue. He understood exactly what she meant, because her elevation had arrived alongside another woman's suffering. Then William admitted something he had kept from her. Charles had consulted him privately several weeks earlier, through a recorded palace conversation preserved for the succession files. William had not authored the decree. But he had told his father clearly that the next reign could not sustain itself beneath two competing centers of female authority. Catherine stared at him as that information settled. The decision had been forming long before the envelope arrived at their home. He insisted he had argued for clarity, not for humiliation. But in that moment, the distinction felt painfully and uncomfortably thin. Camilla received her copy at Clarence House and read it alone. After decades of public controversy, of sustained rejection, and of a slow and hard-won journey toward eventual acceptance, she had genuinely believed that her place beside Charles had finally become unassailable. The document threatened far more than her institutional influence. It threatened the meaning she had attached to every difficult and costly year she had endured to get where she was. When she reached the removal clause, she pushed her chair back so sharply it struck the wall behind her. Her private secretary entered the room immediately. The queen consort folded the pages and told him to leave without offering any explanation. She opened the document again after the door closed. Beside the sealed annex, she found a handwritten notation in the margin. 2 words. After Windsor. Her expression changed the instant she read them. She knew exactly what those words referred to. A private moment the palace had worked carefully to bury. And she understood immediately that the decree had not materialized from nowhere. It had a specific origin. A specific moment. And those 2 words pointed directly back to it. The words after Windsor led back to a private confrontation inside Windsor Castle during a ceremony that was supposed to present a unified royal family to the world. Behind closed doors, a disagreement over Catherine's future role had escalated into something far more dangerous. A direct challenge to William's authority and to Charles's vision for the succession. One sentence, spoken when no cameras were present and no official record was supposed to be kept, changed the entire atmosphere of the room. Those who witnessed it would later describe the moment as the point at which Charles finally understood that affection could no longer be allowed to overrule the crown. The tension had been accumulating for months before Windsor. Camilla had expected that her household, her most trusted advisors, and her ceremonial preferences would remain genuinely influential even after William eventually inherited the throne. The Prince of Wales wanted something entirely different. A leaner, more focused monarchy with clearer lines of authority, fewer competing voices, and firm control centered around his immediate family. That transition mattered because ambiguity could fracture staff loyalties and undermine public confidence before the future king had even properly begun. Catherine had also started attending high-level discussions about public trust, youth engagement, patronage reform, and royal communication strategy. Her growing role within those conversations was not ceremonial window dressing. Charles had come to rely on her ability to reach younger families, to steady the institution during periods of difficulty, and to speak to a public that was changing faster than the monarchy was comfortable acknowledging. Camilla watched that access expand with growing unease. She had begun to fear that the palace was quietly constructing a parallel court around the Wales family, a separate constellation of advisors and influence capable of overshadowing her while she was still standing in the same building as the king. Everything finally broke during the Windsor Commonwealth reception planning meeting. The gathering had been called to organize a major ceremonial event involving representatives from across the Commonwealth, the voluntary association of nations connected through shared history and ongoing cooperation. Catherine had been expected to chair the Future Strategy Committee. The Queen Consort objected. With both Charles and William present and listening, she delivered the sentence that set everything in motion. "There cannot be two queens directing this family while I am still here." Catherine did not raise her voice. She did not argue. She closed her briefing folder, looked directly at the monarch, and asked quietly whether her presence had somehow become an obstacle to the room. Charles hesitated. His silence lasted only a few seconds. But it landed harder than any spoken answer could have done. Catherine remained composed. But the hurt was completely unmistakable, because the role she had accepted and carried as a matter of duty was being treated by the room as though it were an act of personal ambition. William pushed his chair back and told Camilla directly that Catherine's future authority was not something she had the right to restrict. The king raised one hand and called for calm. The prince refused to sit again until his wife's position was formally acknowledged. Camilla repeated that she wanted no conflict. He insisted the situation had already moved well beyond the personal. After Catherine left the room, Camilla urged Charles to delay any further transfer of strategic responsibilities to the Wales household. She warned him, in a conversation that was formally documented, that William was moving too quickly and that his wife's public popularity might begin to overshadow the sovereign before the current reign had run its natural course. The monarch said very little in response. But later that same evening he requested the confidential succession files and wrote 4 words across the Windsor record. "Continuity requires clarity." Within 48 hours, constitutional advisors had begun drafting the instrument that would formally remove Camilla from the monarchy's future structure. When Camilla understood that a single furious sentence spoken at Windsor had become the foundation upon which her removal had been built, she refused to allow the judgment to stand without confronting Charles face to face. She did not summon advisors. She did not contact her family or issue any instructions to her household. She carried the folded document directly to Charles herself and closed the library door behind her. No aides remained in the room. No courtiers were present to soften the language or manage the atmosphere. For the first time since the decree had been signed, husband and wife stood alone with the full truth of what had happened placed on the table between them. Camilla set the pages down and asked Charles the question he had been dreading most. Had he genuinely acted to protect the crown, or had he simply chosen Catherine over her? Charles had dismissed his staff hours earlier and had been working through state papers in the private library at Clarence House when she arrived. The signed instrument lay open between them. Its broken seal confirmed that the decision could no longer be protected by palace procedure or institutional distance. A royal consort is the spouse of a reigning monarch, but that position carries no automatic guarantee of influence once that reign ends. Camilla understood the distinction completely. The document did not remove her as the king's wife. But it declared with absolute clarity that her authority would cease at the moment his reign did. She would hold no guaranteed voice inside William's future household. No seat at the table where the decisions were made. She dropped the pages onto the desk and accused him directly of allowing William and Catherine to determine how history would remember her. She demanded to know whether decades of standing beside him could truly be cancelled by one difficult afternoon at Windsor. Charles rose slowly but kept his voice entirely controlled. He told her the choice had belonged to him alone. No advisor had forced his hand. No constitutional obligation had dictated the outcome. The crown could not enter a new reign while carrying rival courts, split staff loyalties, and an unresolved contest over Catherine's authority. The Queen Consort looked at him differently in that moment. She had fully expected him to point toward officials, toward legal pressures, toward the advice of constitutional experts. Instead, the king accepted the complete and unshared weight of the decision. That honesty hit harder than any excuse he could have offered, because it meant he had looked directly at the cost and signed the document anyway. Charles then disclosed what the confidential household review had found. Windsor had been the final trigger, but it had not been the only cause. The documented assessment had identified staff receiving contradictory instructions from different directions, advisors competing openly for strategic control, and members of Camilla's inner circle deliberately slowing the transfer of charitable patronages to Catherine. Patronages are the formal royal connections to charities and public organizations that shape both influence and public visibility, and leaving them contested would have kept the old conflict permanently alive. The monarch told her plainly that allowing two competing households to fight over those roles would have damaged William's authority before his reign had even properly begun. Camilla asked whether Catherine had specifically requested her removal. Charles answered immediately. She had requested nothing of the kind. Through a recorded private consultation, the future queen had actively urged him to avoid unnecessary humiliation and to handle the transition in a way that preserved Camilla's dignity wherever possible. That answer denied the wounded queen consort the enemy she had been preparing herself to fight. There was no one to blame but the man standing in front of her. Camilla slowly removed her wedding ring and placed it beside the decree on the desk. A long silence passed between them before she put it back on. Then she told him that if he had truly chosen the institution over her future, he would need to explain that choice personally to William. Charles had endured her anger. But the harder conversation was waiting for him in a smaller room at Windsor, where father and son would sit down together and determine whether the decree represented genuine unity or the final fracturing of trust between one generation and the next. The confrontation had exposed a painful and inescapable truth. Camilla possessed influence, emotional closeness to the king, and proximity to power. But the authority to shape the monarchy's future had always resided with the sovereign. Charles could listen to his wife, push back against his son, or find ways to slow Catherine's rise. But only he could sign the instrument that settled the succession structure permanently. Now he had to face William and explain honestly why he had used that authority in the way he had. The conversation that followed would reveal whether the decree had been written for the crown or whether it had been driven, at least in part, by a father's private guilt. Charles waited in his sitting room at Windsor with the signed instrument placed on the table between two chairs. As sovereign, he controlled household appointments, transition planning, ceremonial precedents, and the confidential guidance being prepared for the next king. Ceremonial precedent is the formal established order determining where royals stand, sit, and appear at official occasions, making it one of the clearest visible signals of institutional rank and status. The Crown Continuity Instrument had also been structured specifically to survive any subsequent personal pressure. Copies had been lodged with the sovereign's private office and with the Transition Secretariat, the small dedicated team responsible for ensuring an orderly and stable transfer between reigns, so that no private family reconciliation could quietly make it disappear. The king removed his glasses, pressed his hands against his eyes, and rehearsed his opening sentence to himself twice before William entered the room. Constitutional opposition had never frightened Charles the way his son's judgment did. William sat down but did not look at the document on the table between them. He told his father directly that he had never wanted Camilla humiliated. He had wanted certainty for Catherine, not retribution against the woman his father loved. Charles answered that uncertainty had itself become the danger. Every week of further delay allowed rival advisors to dig deeper into their positions, staff loyalties to fracture further, and Catherine's future authority to be questioned and undermined before she had even formally assumed it. William pressed him for the complete truth of what had driven the decision. Charles then disclosed, through their recorded private conversation prepared for the Royal Archive, that he had expanded Catherine's powers without first consulting the Prince of Wales. Public confidence data had shown consistently that people trusted her stability and her instinct for connecting with the country. Household assessments described her as the most effective bridge between the monarchy's traditional foundations and the expectations of younger generations. Commonwealth consultations, formal discussions with representatives from the International Association of Nations connected to the Crown, had identified her as essential to the long-term stability of the next reign. William had expected his father to protect his wife. He had not expected the scope of what the document had actually placed in her hands. Charles moved to the clauses concerning Camilla. The instrument had been drafted to preserve her personal residence, her financial security, her charitable work, the respect owed to her ceremonial contributions, and her personal dignity for the remainder of her life. She would not be publicly disgraced. She would not be written out of the history of his reign. But those protections had been deliberately and carefully separated from any institutional authority. Personal honor could remain fully intact. Her ability to direct appointments, shape strategy, or influence the future household's decisions would not survive the transition. William eventually lifted the receipt confirming he had read and understood the instrument. He signed it. But he refused to treat the moment as any kind of achievement. He told his father that Catherine would carry the responsibility that came with this document. She would not enjoy a victory. Charles accepted the rebuke without attempting to defend himself. As William reached the door, Charles stopped him. A member of Camilla's household had made a copy of part of the decree, the king told him. Palace security believed the copied page may already have left royal control. William turned back. The family's private confrontation was about to become public property. The palace could manage grief and tension behind closed doors. But once fragments of the decree reached the media, every private wound was about to become a national conversation. The first leak contained only 11 words. But they were sufficient to shake the palace to its foundations. The future queen shall assume undivided authority after the transition. Within minutes, newspaper editors were demanding confirmation. Royal correspondents were calling every contact they possessed. Staff members throughout the palace began searching urgently for the missing copy. An institution that had carefully controlled the secret for weeks had suddenly and completely lost control of the story. Upstairs, Camilla heard a television presenter speak Catherine's name and understood with cold clarity that her private removal was in the process of becoming public history. A national broadcaster received a photograph of a single paragraph through an encrypted message designed to conceal the sender's identity. The document's title had been obscured, but the royal seal, the king's handwritten initials, and the reference to the future queen made any attempt at dismissal almost impossible. Buckingham Palace entered crisis mode immediately. Communications officials sat down and drafted 3 possible responses. A complete denial. A partial confirmation acknowledging only that transition planning was underway. Or a full admission that the instrument existed combined with a refusal to explain what it meant for Camilla specifically. But the leak had already demonstrated that the process of preparing for the next reign had become something else entirely. A battle over who would control the future. Camilla sat alone as the breaking coverage continued around her. When the presenter on screen described Catherine as the monarchy's undisputed future female leader, the queen consort reached toward the remote control and stopped herself. She could not silence those words. Part of her needed to hear how quickly and how naturally the country was accepting them. Every sentence transformed her private fear into documented public fact. The authority she had fought for years to secure was dissolving in front of millions of people, and her silence offered her no defense whatsoever. Catherine received the news while sitting with Prince Louis helping him with his schoolwork. Her phone vibrated repeatedly until she stepped quietly into the hallway and called William. Louis looked toward the closed door for a moment before returning to his work, sensing without being told that something in the world outside had shifted. She told William she would not allow her elevation to be framed publicly as a victory over another woman. He agreed without hesitation. But he told her clearly that once the story had reached the public, the palace could no longer direct how people chose to allocate their sympathy and their blame. Security officers traced the photographed page to a photocopier used by one of Camilla's senior household aides. During a recorded internal interview, the aide insisted the copy had been made solely for the purpose of obtaining independent legal advice. But the timing of the leak told a considerably darker story. Someone may have decided that releasing the information publicly represented the best remaining chance of frightening Charles into retreating before the instrument could be made permanent and irreversible. Charles did not retreat. When officials placed a carefully worded denial in front of him, the king pushed it to one side and rejected outright any proposal to withdraw or suspend the decree. He said that reversing course would make the future crown appear negotiable and would open an invitation to every wounded faction within the palace to challenge William's authority directly. That answer ended, permanently and completely, any remaining hope that the decision could still be undone. Catherine then made a request that nobody had anticipated. She asked to meet Camilla privately, without Charles, without William, without secretaries, lawyers, or advisors present. The people around both women advised strongly against it. The wounded queen consort accepted anyway. With the palace issuing instructions around them from every direction, Catherine and Camilla chose silence. They chose privacy. And they chose one final meeting between themselves that would determine whether the decree ended in lasting bitterness or in something closer to dignity. No private secretaries took notes. No husband waited nearby. No constitutional language could cover or soften what had actually happened between them. Catherine arrived at the small garden room at Clarence House and found Camilla sitting beside an untouched tray of tea. For several seconds neither woman spoke. One had been formally named as the monarchy's future. The other had been told that her place in that future would not exist. And yet the turning point between them did not come through accusation or through confrontation. It came through the very first sentence Catherine allowed herself to say. "I did not come here to take anything from you." Catherine had chosen the garden room deliberately. A formal palace chamber would have placed them both inside a space defined by rank, by succession, and by constant reminders of who was ascending and who was being left behind. Succession is the established order through which the crown and all of its responsibilities pass to the next monarch. But this meeting was no longer about institutional rules. Both women understood that the decree could not be reversed without undermining Charles and making William's eventual authority appear open to challenge before it had even begun. They were not in that room to negotiate over power. They were there to decide whether they could survive its consequences without destroying one another in the process. Camilla finally asked Catherine whether she felt relieved. She expected careful diplomatic evasion, possibly even denial. What she received instead was painful and completely unguarded honesty. Catherine told her the document had transformed a distant and abstract future duty into something immediate and inescapable. It had placed the full weight of the next reign directly upon her shoulders while connecting that weight to Camilla's very public loss. She did not feel victorious. She felt frightened. The queen consort studied her carefully as she spoke. And in doing so she realized that the woman sitting across from her had never looked at the decree as a conquest. Camilla then admitted, through their private and entirely unrecorded conversation, that her anger had never been purely about institutional authority. She had believed that remaining genuinely influential after Charles's reign would prove, finally and irrefutably, that she had been truly accepted. The years of controversy had followed her into every room she had ever entered. Future influence had seemed like the definitive answer to everyone who had never been willing to forgive her. Losing that place made her afraid that history would ultimately reduce her entire life to the scandal that had defined its beginning. Catherine told her that she had privately asked Charles to protect Camilla's charitable work, her personal dignity, and her place within the recorded history of his reign. She had also specifically requested that the palace avoid language such as punishment, defeat, or expulsion in any public announcement about the transition. She wanted clear institutional boundaries. She had refused to build them through humiliation. Camilla lowered her eyes before she responded. She acknowledged openly that challenging Catherine in front of William and the assembled staff at Windsor had crossed a line she should not have crossed. She did not apologize for the fear of irrelevance that had driven her to that moment. But she apologized for forcing another woman to carry that fear as though it were somehow her responsibility to bear. Catherine accepted those words without pretending the damage between them had disappeared. Before Catherine left, Camilla handed her a folded handwritten statement in which she formally accepted the future transition. She asked Catherine to place it directly into Charles's hands before the palace addressed the country publicly. Their meeting had not restored Camilla's power. But it gave Charles something the decree alone could never have created. A way of announcing the new future to the nation without destroying the people it was leaving behind. By the time the sun came up, the secret document no longer belonged to the palace. It belonged to breakfast tables, to television studios, to crowded pavements in central London, and to millions of ordinary people trying to understand what their king had decided and why. Some saw Catherine's elevation as the beginning of a stronger and more clearly directed monarchy. Others saw Camilla's removal as a ruthless and final verdict on a woman who had already paid an enormous price. But one image captured the country's mood more powerfully than any editorial commentary. Two women standing silently outside Buckingham Palace, each holding a portrait of a different queen, standing side by side. Buckingham Palace issued the statement the country had been waiting for. Charles had formally approved a long-term continuity framework defining how the responsibilities and authority of the crown would transfer into the next reign. The language deliberately avoided the word removal. But its meaning could not be obscured. Camilla would retain her dignity within the present reign. She would hold no automatic governing role within William's future household. The decision mattered because divided authority would have weakened the Prince of Wales before he had even had the opportunity to establish himself, and would have forced Catherine to begin her queenship under sustained and organized challenge. Broadcasters described it as the clearest and most consequential royal transition decision since Charles had himself become king. Analysts focused on the breadth of Catherine's newly formalized responsibilities, the deliberate narrowing of Camilla's future influence, and the monarch's clear determination to prevent rival courts from taking root inside the palace. A rival court meaning a separate and competing circle of advisors and loyalties operating in opposition to the official royal household. The country was no longer discussing a private family disagreement conducted behind closed doors. It was watching one era formally establish the boundaries of another. William stood beside Catherine and their children when the announcement was made public. When a presenter described her as the woman now formally entrusted with carrying the monarchy into its next chapter, she struggled visibly to contain her emotion. She had spent years preparing for duty. She had never once wanted that preparation acknowledged through another woman's pain. William took her hand without speaking. His silence held pride, and fear, and the full knowledge that their private life had just moved permanently and irrevocably closer to the throne. Camilla listened alone when the palace read out a paraphrased version of her handwritten acceptance. She closed her eyes. She did not look away. For the first time she heard her surrender presented not as a defeat but as an act of service to the stability of the institution. The words could not give her back her future authority. But they protected her from being cast publicly as the obstacle to Catherine's rise. The London Chronicle marked the moment with a full-width image of Charles's pen resting on the signed page beneath a single headline. The King chooses the future. Outside Buckingham Palace a crowd gathered in the rain beneath a shared canopy of umbrellas. One woman held a photograph of Catherine. Another held a photograph of Camilla. They stood together in the gray morning light, reflecting a public mood that contained both genuine excitement and genuine sorrow in equal measure. A broadcaster read one confirmed line from the continuity framework. The next reign must begin with unity of command, clarity of duty, and confidence in its queen. Catherine's authority was formally settled. That evening Charles summoned William, Catherine, and Camilla for one final private gathering. Britain had already concluded that the monarchy had entered a new era. But behind the palace doors Charles still owed the three people most affected by his signature an honest account of what it had meant and why he had done it. The final meeting contained no advisors, no cameras, and no documents awaiting signature. Charles sat opposite William, Catherine, and Camilla, fully aware that the monarchy's future had been secured at an immense and deeply personal cost. He could not restore Camilla's lost authority without reopening the conflict that had made the decree necessary in the first place. He could not reduce Catherine's formal role without compromising the next reign before it had begun. There was nothing left for him to do but speak honestly to the three people whose lives he had altered with a single pen stroke. He told them that the secret document had never been about determining which woman mattered more to him or to the institution. It had been about determining precisely where one reign ended and where another was required to begin. Charles confirmed that the Crown continuity instrument would remain permanently and fully in force. Catherine would become queen beside William with undivided authority over the future household's public mission, its strategic direction, and its agenda for connecting the monarchy with a changing country. The future monarch could not begin his reign while competing advisors contested his wife's authority from within the same institution. He turned toward Camilla and confirmed what she would keep: her dignity, her financial security, her residence, her charitable associations, her recognized contribution to the history of his reign. All of it would remain protected. What would not survive the transition was her ability to direct appointments, shape policy, oversee patronage transfers, or participate in decisions about the future household. A patronage transfer is the formal passing of a royal connection with a charity or public organization from one family member to another. These roles carry genuine public influence, and leaving them contested would have kept the old conflict alive inside the new reign. Charles turned toward Camilla and told her, through the private account prepared for the royal archive, that signing the document had caused him profound pain. He told her that love could not justify asking the monarchy to remain structurally uncertain. She answered that she understood that. Understanding it, she said, did not make the loss any less real. Her voice remained controlled because she had finally reached the point of accepting that the decree had not denied their marriage. It had drawn a boundary around her institutional authority. Nothing more and nothing less. Catherine then gave Camilla a promise. Her queenship would not be built upon the other woman's humiliation. She would acknowledge the work Camilla had performed during Charles's reign and honor the limits the document had established between them. Camilla looked at her and accepted that promise, knowing that being acknowledged was not the same as retaining control. But it was not the same as being erased either. William lifted the signed instrument from its folder and read the closing paragraph in silence. Then he returned it to his father rather than keeping it. Charles closed the folder, secured the seal, and placed it inside the transition box, the protected container holding all instructions and guidance prepared for the next reign. That single quiet act brought the argument to a close. Camilla would remain a permanent and honored part of the monarchy's recorded history. Catherine would determine its future direction. One woman accepted the full burden of what came next. The other accepted that her royal chapter had reached its natural and final boundary. Charles had chosen clarity above sentiment. He had chosen the succession above personal rivalry. He had chosen continuity above the impossible attempt to keep competing loyalties alive inside the same institution. When the meeting ended, Catherine walked forward carrying the weight and the responsibility of the reign still to come. Camilla stepped back with her dignity preserved and her place in history secured. And Charles remained beside the sealed transition box, knowing that the crown had survived because he had finally, at the cost of everything it took from him personally, chosen a clear future over the comfort of an unresolved past.